Welcome to Blaze News, The Mandate, Day 20. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other U.S. officials met with Russian delegates in Saudi Arabia. The officials agreed to work together to end the war in Ukraine and even to explore geographic and economic partnerships between the United States and Russia, which is signaling a seismic shift in relations between the two countries. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz spoke after the meeting, and here's what he had to say about that and Trump's approach to the war.
If you just think about just in a few months, President Trump has shifted the entire global conversation from not if the war is going to end, but just how it's going to end.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio floated a potential lift on sanctions against Russia. Watch this.
Well, sanctions are all the result of this conflict. There are sanctions that were imposed as a result of this conflict. And so I would say to you that in order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter. But and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed.
During this trip overseas, Rubio also stopped by the Church at the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, stating that the United States will do everything to ensure that the Christian presence in Israel remains stable. There have been concerns over Christians being driven out of the Holy Land, and Rubio's statement reaffirmed the administration's commitment to protecting Christianity. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has already chosen investigators to look into the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan during Joe Biden's presidency and has promised accountability is coming. Hegseth is also accusing the IRS of rushing through a last-minute audit of him and his wife and their finances after he was nominated by President Trump. On X, he shared a photo of the claim from the IRS that says that he owes some $33,000 in income taxes and wrote, "Of course, the outgoing Biden IRS rushed an audit of the incoming defense secretary. It's a total sham. The party of norms and decency strikes again. We will never back down." In DOGE news, the Michelle King, who's the acting commissioner of Social Security Administration, reportedly stepped down over DOGE's request to access information about Social Security recipients. King had refused to provide the information before stepping down this past weekend. So why might some Social Security Administration officials be reluctant about an audit from DOGE? A recent Inspector General's report revealed some fishy stats. Watch this.
There was an Inspector General audit last year that showed over an 8-year period, the Social Security Administration made almost $72 billion in improper payments, a little less than 1% of payments in that time period. Now, the report also says that most of these improper payments were overpayments, not payments to deceased people or people who didn't qualify to receive these payments.
And DOGE found that $4.7 trillion in payments from the federal government are untraceable because the identification code that links the Treasury payment to a budget line item was optional and often left blank. And there's a new Republican task force responsible for the declassification of federal secrets that we told you about last week, and that Representative Anna Paulina Luna would lead the team. Well, today we learned that Representatives Nancy Mace, Tim Burchett, Lauren Boebert, Eric Burleson, Eli Crane, and Brandon Gill will join her to help bring the truth to the American people. And finally, Trump's border policies are making an impact already. The border crossings have plummeted after Trump's inauguration, with an average of 2,000 daily crossings before Trump took office, dropping to 786 daily crossings after Inauguration Day. And that's a decrease of 85%. Now, let's bring in Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. So, Matt, when we look at this, Marco Rubio and others, they're going through and trying to broker a deal to end the war in Ukraine. So what could they be going through? And they're at the negotiating table where the administration from, the Bidens, they were never even trying to do this. It feels like this is a whole new day.
Yeah, I mean, the entire focus of American foreign policy has changed. It's no secret that Trump has said from the very beginning that he would end this war, end the conflict, and bring peace. back to the international stage as an option instead of the continuation, of the West really pushing Ukraine from the beginning to fight Russia for the sake of, destroying Russia or running Russian down. But of course, the cost of that, what we did was use the Ukrainians, and many, tens of thousands of people are dead. It's been devastating. And you can just see the desire of this administration to bring peace. And it's very serious. And it's very impressive what a lot of these people have already accomplished. I mean, look, Secretary of State Rubio, it's unbelievable. If anyone had any doubts about him in the role, you can already see him being very comfortable, both slapping down the press and saying very calm things that make total sense, I think, as a realistic American foreign policy. And you kind of know, right? It really feels like they're going to be able to get a deal done, but it's very complicated business. But here we are, only a few weeks in, and they're already at it. I mean, promises made, promises kept. They're doing exactly what they said they were going to do in trying to bring peace to Ukraine and Russia.
Not only peace, but accountability, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at the botched Afghan withdrawal, Pete Hegseth already moving forward on that, because that is such a big deal that, any administration, you could kind of just overlook this. That is something that happened years ago. We can move on and look forward. No, they want to make sure that they go through and say something like this is not going to happen again. And we are going to give answers to the American people.
There's so many reasons that this is important, this issue of bringing reconciliation and justice for what happened in Afghanistan. But I just want to say that the biggest one is for the millions of veterans out there who fought for decades in this land and then watched as we walked out and left this disaster. And you have to think, how many people do you know, right, who are veterans? So many friends of mine, just watching them watch this, it made me extremely angry for them. And I can't imagine how they felt after being there for 20 years for what, right? And when we walked out that way, it was one of the most disgraceful few days that America has witnessed in the last 25 years. And that's saying something, because we've seen a lot of bad things happen. So to actually get justice for what happened and how we withdrew and the manner in which we withdrew is really, really important.
Yeah, and we see the suicide rate for veterans after that had happened. Mm-hmm. And it would spike because these people said, oh my gosh, I went over there, I served my country, mm-hmm. and now what was this for? And it's such a harrowing little moment that you have here that now hopefully this can bring some peace to all those veterans.
Remember, the military lied about this repeatedly, right? I mean, they kept on telling the presidents and telling the rest of the world that everything was fine and that we needed to just stay there and keep going. And that all needs to be looked at now.
And you look at the $4.7 trillion that DOGE is now saying, oh, they're untraceable, right? Okay, so if the federal government does it, Matthew, it's no big deal. But if you or I send $600 in a Venmo payment, the IRS had better know about it.
No, exactly. We can't send a few $100 without the IRS being on our case. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense can't audit itself, and we have trillions of dollars that aren't being really marked for anything. So here's the thing. A lot of people are dismissing this stuff right now because they're saying, well, what numbers is Elon really even looking at? And it's kind of coming out in drips and drabs. But let me tell you this. These are very smart people who know what they're talking about, and they're just getting started, right? They're just plowing through. By the time we get through, the first 100 days, the first 6 months, the first year, trust me, people like us will be doing the stories on all of this and showing where the waste and fraud is.
It's going to feel like a whole different world 1 year from now. I can't imagine what stories we are actually going to be covering 365 days from now. Well, don't go anywhere, because Chris Bedford will unpack the Republican infighting, yes, that's still happening, over Trump nominee Elbridge Colby, coming up next. Well, Good Ranchers, they have 85% of their grass-fed beef in stores. You know that it's actually imported, right? Well, that's thanks to a 2015 law change. Foreign meat can now be labeled as product of the United States. And the grocery store meat, right? All of that, it has the antibiotics, the hormones, and the seed oils. Nobody wants to deal with that. And you don't have to. GoodRanchers.com. They make sure that your meat is harvested right here from the United States. So you know exactly where your food comes from. And the best part is you can go through and have Good Ranchers deliver it straight to your door. You can have all that farm-to-table quality right now with their New Year, New Meat promo. You can get free ground beef, chicken breast, or wild-caught salmon in your order for a year with $25 off with code Jill at checkout. Don't wait. Go order now. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Well, the GOP is split over Elbridge Colby's nomination to serve as the Pentagon's undersecretary, prompting Vice President J.D. Vance to step in the crossfire in defense of Colby. So here to break this down for us is Chris Bedford. And Bedford, I've seen out there, okay, so we have J.D. Vance jumping in. I saw Don Jr. Writing an op-ed piece. So why is Colby getting some pushback from Republicans?
Well, because Colby's someone who has questioned the blob. I mean, that's just straight up. You see some people trying to call that being a Democrat. You see some people trying to call that not being a loyal Republican. If you look back and try to remember in the lead up to the Iraq war, the way that people were treated, if they tried to say, hold on a second, what are we doing here? Maybe this isn't actually foreign policy. And maybe historically, this is not even what a conservative foreign policy would look like, which is, I think, a whole different philosophical argument from the here and now. But Colby is someone who has thought outside the box on a lot of these issues. You know, and J.D. Vance, the vice president, has thought outside the box on a lot of these sorts of issues. I mean, he checks out the content that we put out at the Blaze. He's a confirmed reader of magazines like Compact, where you have people from the left and right coming together and pushing back against some of the foreign policy assumptions that we've always had to deal with from this blob, both Democrats and Republicans. Now, there is a main reason, which is Colby's main thing is that China is the number one threat, and that the United States' nightmare scenario is facing a well-armed and belligerent Russia at the same time as an armed and belligerent China. That would be an extreme danger, in his view, to the United States' security and the ability to actually win those conflicts. And those are his focus. He thinks that most other things get us off that focus, particularly conflicts in the Middle East. There's a huge amount of Republicans, rightly or wrongly, who disagree with that. If you're Senator Tom Cotton, who's a powerful voice for neoconservatives, but someone who has been willing to work with President Trump on a number of issues, one of Colby's very dangerous lines is that the United States could potentially deal with a nuclear-armed Iran, and that containment of a nuclear-armed Iran is preferable to war with Iran. And that's something that's just one of his many papers. He's got decades he's put out there. He's talked about belligerence against Iran, what that would look like, why that might be necessary. But this is a sticking point for Iran hawks like Tom Cotton. Now, they came out and they started to push back, and you started to see on the movement online. And it seems like the Trump White House is trying somewhat of the Pete Hegseth strategy, which is, while J.D. Vance has been very conciliatory and has worked closely on guiding these nominees through and has been willing to help assuage the concerns of senators and set up meetings to make sure these sorts of things happen, they also usually pick a target. That's one of the things that has really worked against the blob and has worked in favor of MAGA on a lot of these certain issues, is they actually say, all right, you're the senator who we're going to pick to be the opponent of Pete Hegseth. Sure, it may have been Mitch McConnell put you up to it. There's almost certainly a bunch of senators, whether it's Young or Tillis, whoever, who are right behind you, whispering in your ear and ready to join forces. But we're just going to pick one person. It's kind of like a prison yard philosophy of beat up one person on where everyone can see it on your first day and let everyone know not to mess with you. Well, they've got a close relationship with Tom Cotton, but it seems like he may have picked this card. Now, Senator Vance, Vice President Vance didn't go after him, but he went after some of the people who are pushing this, and he went after them hard, saying that Colby is one of the greatest strategic minds he's ever actually met. They're old friends. He calls them Bridge. They go way back, and this is going to be the next fight that we're going to see.
Well, let's go ahead and listen to Colby himself, because he has this crazy idea, Bedford, that foreign policy should be America first. Let's listen.
I travel the world a lot, as you do, and in most other countries, you know, in Korea they put Korean interests first, in India they put India's, in Poland they put Polish interests first. Why should we be any different? And now that doesn't mean that we're going to be, nasty or mean or aggressive or belligerent unnecessarily. In fact, I think in the platform they talked about the importance of strong alliances, but alliances that work for us too. Yeah. And I think you mentioned things like the international organizations, the UN, the border, things where, hey, foreign policy is not something that just happens for the benefit of the Beltway establishment, but rather something that should be connected to what the American people actually think is necessary.
Well, Chris, it feels like the America First agenda is just a tidal wave that is running through this country right now.
Yeah, and this is a foreign policy that I think it's best just constrained within one sentence from Young Americans for Freedom's old Sharon statement from 1960, which is the foreign policy of the United States should be judged along the following terms: serving the just interests of the United States. Now, those interests should not be unjust. You should not be going about committing evil in the name of the United States. We don't want to be colonial Holland or something here. But you also have to understand that the interests of the United States ought to come first. That is something that has long been forgotten by both the Department of Defense and the Department of State. Something that Donald Trump talked a lot about in his first term in office, when he, for example, went to the Philippines and said, went to Vietnam, and said, "This is some very nice U.S. equipment you have. Why do you have it?" "Well, you gave it to us." "Do you buy from us?" And they said, "No, we buy from China." And he said, "Then why did we give this to you? This is not in our interests. This isn't, what are we actually doing here?" Now, there could be things that could be actually worked out, and with all these different countries. But the first question the policymakers should be asking is, how does this serve the United States? And that's something that, despite being painstakingly obvious, has been forgotten. You'll see people, I've seen, and sometimes the dumber ones will actually say the quiet part out loud. Where you have whole arguments you'd see in the pages of the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, for example, on why the United States should invade this Middle Eastern country. And there'll be 5 reasons. And all of them are usually pretty good reasons for countries like maybe Israel or for countries like Saudi Arabia. And some of the dumber op-eds will even list those other countries and their security interests and why it's important. And now those countries have legitimate security interests. And the countries that we're talking about invading maybe are something that they ought to consider invading. But they so often confuse our interests with those of our even close allies that it needs to stop. And people are afraid when someone actually calls that out.
We cannot emphasize that point enough. Like you say, it's simple, but people need to grasp it. If you don't go for that simple goal, you will fail. And people who have the political will, even if they disagree about how to get there, who actually want to do the thing, are what's coming back to Washington in this administration. Thank God. Speaking of which, let's move to Marco Rubio. Secretary of State Rubio, very interesting trip that he's on right now. Recently, though, he visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre when he was in Israel. Chris, let's talk about the significance of that visit and that picture that's been circulating of him there.
Oh, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the most sacred sites in all of Christendom. And it's one that's hotly contested amongst Christians. It's divided between 3 different Christian sects, including the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And they really don't like it if you cross over their lines into this church or disrupt their different services that are going on. But it's kind of a symbol of, there's a largely forgotten aspect of the conflict in Israel and around Israel, that despite a huge amount of American Christian support for all the actors in there, people sometimes forget that there are Christians who live there and are on the ground. And they're spread out across the entire area. There are Christians in Syria, and Christians, of course, in Lebanon. There are Christians in Gaza, Catholic churches and Orthodox churches in Gaza. There are Christians, of course, in Jerusalem. And so often you hear these conflicts talked about in such simplistic terms, which is just Israel, America's ally, secular Jewish state, versus the Palestinians and whoever's ruling them at the time. And people often forget about those who are not empowered, those who do not get military grants, those who aren't given Iron Dome or are not given aid, or you don't have left-wing nonprofits pouring in to feed them or protect them or claim that they're somehow being victimized. They're completely forgotten in the mix. So to see a United States, which is largely a Christian country, founded as a Christian country, Secretary of State go over there and say the United States has a real concern to all sides and all parties about the treatment and protection of the one group in this entire region which has no army, no intelligence apparatus, no major groups that really supporting them, is a really welcome sign. And I mean, it is shocking because you never see it. No administration, whether they're pro-Christian, anti-Christian, seems to talk about this forgotten group, and it's just so refreshing to see that from the Secretary of State.
Well, let's move over to the Secretary of Transportation. Sean Duffy and Pete Buttigieg went after each other on X. It was an interesting exchange because Buttigieg was asking, how many FAA personnel were actually fired? Well, Duffy responded in part saying that Mayor Pete failed for 4 years to address the air traffic controller shortage and upgrade our outdated World War II era air traffic control system. He said, you know what? Here's the truth. The FAA alone has a staggering 45,000 employees, and less than 400 were let go, and 0 air traffic controllers and critical safety personnel were let go. But Mayor Pete chose this amazing department, and he wanted to have this that's so critical to America's success as a slush fund for the Green New Scam and environmental justice nonsense. So when you see this WWE fight, Bedford, what do you make of this one between Duffy and Buttigieg?
I can't believe how much Peter screwed up at the Department of Transportation. I mean, that's kind of supposed to be a posh political post. One that you're not going to have to fight a war. You're not going to have to make peace in the Middle East. You're not in charge of America's nukes. But you are, it turns out, in charge of an infrastructure which everyone knows and has known for a long time is aging and decrepit and on its way out. And he did nothing to improve it. From his day one, he sat through disaster after disaster, whether it was a train literally exploding a town in the vice president's home state, or whether it was air traffic controllers and near misses, whether it was backups and the actual ability for us to bring cargo ships into the United States and actually unload their cargo. And he failed at every single one. He literally was working from home like some kind of Zoomer, playing mommy with little Instagram things with him home with the child that they adopted. It's completely embarrassing. He didn't do the job. For him to come back out and say this is wild. And at the same time, the Blaze did a great documentary on this, the next disaster, the next aviation disaster, because every bit of this was predictable. This is not like a freak storm that just comes out of nowhere. And how are we possibly going to deal with this? This has been building. And it's so important for people to recognize that so much of American decline is not because of some force of God outside of our control. It is the conscious decision mixed with neglect, mixed with active harm by people and departments that work in concert to undermine us and to put priorities which are far from actual aviation safety before aviation safety.
Amen. There's probably no greater symbol of the failure of the professional managerial class than Mr. Buttigieg, complete failure. We have something fun to talk about, though, in the last 60 seconds here or so. I'm going to give you a world historical layup. I'm just going to put it in Chris Bedford's lap because, as you may have heard, the 2025 Principles First Summit is coming up. And its attendees include Mark Cuban, Chris Christie, Adam Kinzinger, and our own favorite here at Blaze, Harry Dunn, the disgraced Capitol Hill cop. So you want to explain to people what this summit is, using at least PG-related language?
It's such a collection of low-T has-beens and scoldy schoolmarms. It is unbelievable. It's like a cartoon lineup. It's if I had to make a lineup of 100 people or 25 people who I don't want to see and don't want to hear what they say. I never really want to hear from them ever again. And you got to wonder whose tail is wagging to buy these tickets. I guarantee you that your signal thread or your chat message thread with your friends from college or high school is significantly more interesting than anything that any of these people have to say. And it's such a self-pleasuring exercise, maybe done in a circle, from these folks to actually get together and pat each other in the back and claim that they put principles first, when so clearly they've put their careerism first. These people aren't suffering. They make money. I mean, it's the people out there who are actually fighting for principled stances, who are actually taking the hits. These guys just sit there and they pat themselves in the back and they go all the way to the bank and their house in McLean is not threatened. And, I applaud them for putting together such a Burger King Kids Club of unimpressive people.
You can have it your way, Bedford. It's fine. You know what, Mr. Editor-in-Chief? We send Julio Rosas out to protests all the time. Maybe we have to send him to this. I mean, this might be too good to pass up.
Probably is more dangerous than the protests in some ways, and it certainly is a flaming pile of riotous garbage. So, I mean, it would be...
I might get an appletini thrown in my face.
Yeah.
It would be fun to actually send Julio. It's not a bad idea.
It might happen. All right, Bedford. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you then.
What does the MAGA youth movement look like? Our own digital strategist, Logan Hall, will explain next. From viral memes to PAC rallies, the MAGA youth movement is taking the internet and the country by storm. Young conservatives are stepping up and speaking out, and they're reshaping the political landscape like never before. But what's fueling this surge, and how can the right harness this momentum for the future? Joining us now to break it all down is Blaze Media's digital strategist, Logan Hall. So, Logan, thanks for joining us. Let's get into this youth movement. So what is driving young Americans to join MAGA? Because this is something that we haven't seen on the right in quite some time.
Yeah, President Trump boasts about this a lot, that he had this big presence on TikTok, and he famously kind of captured a lot of the youth movement when that was traditionally something that the Democrats do in these big presidential elections. I think part of this is Matt and I were talking about this earlier. There are a few things at play here. Number one is, I'm 29, so I'm still like sort of on that younger end a little bit. But when I got involved in politics, I was about 20 years old. And so for pretty much my entire adult life, President Trump has just dominated the conversation. There's been no one like him, no national figure that has care. And this is partially due to just how terrible the media is, because they can't focus on anything but him. But the not our media, but the legacy media, obviously. But that he has dominated the headlines and news cycles for the past 10 years just endlessly. So when you compare that to who do the Democrats have, I guess, Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, they don't really have anything to compete on that front. They don't have anybody to sort of speak to the youth to. Trump talked about the American dream during the campaign. When was the last time anybody talked about the American dream for young people? I think another thing at play here is that young people aren't getting a lot of their news from traditional sources like Fox News or CNN, et cetera. They are largely online, and I think a lot of the energy online has been geared towards sort of this right-wing sort of national patriotic. I wouldn't even say a lot of them are conservative. I know a lot of my young friends who had never voted before voted for President Trump in this election, because after the assassination attempt, especially, they said enough is enough. Like, what is going on? We cannot have this in America. I think another thing at play as well is the sort of being able to be proud of your country. Trump speaks to that. The Democrats, they have zero message for young people. Their message is, we hate you, you're terrible. Especially for young men, they have no appeals that they make whatsoever. They are largely just a party dominated by old hysterical women, and I think a lot of America's youth can recognize that. They're tired of the school marmy sort of always constantly lecturing you instead of trying to actually help you.
So, I mean, these are fascinating points. It really is true for people need to realize you're on the old end of the scale of what we're going to talk about here, 18 to 39-year-olds. Yep. But there are a number of people for whom Trump has been the largest figure on the right, just dwarfing everyone else. Yeah. For a long time now. Yeah. And now all of a sudden it's starting to click. So let's look at some of these numbers. I mean, Trump has a 56% approval rating among 18 to 39-year-olds. And this is higher than the other age groups. 56%, 18 to 39. Like, that's remarkable. On the flip side of that, only 28% of this same group strongly disapproves of Trump.
Yes.
So that's not a lot of hate, and that's a lot of love. A majority love coming from younger voters. And then if you look at the oldest end of the spectrum, here's what's actually even more fascinating. You say, like, these old school marms or whatever, 65 plus disapprove of Trump, most by age. I mean, so the people who are the haters are the ones, no doubt, still watching, legacy cable and reading the New York Times assiduously as if it's, some kind of organ of truth.
Yes. Yeah. There's definitely a breakdown with like sort of the issue of the information that people are getting. I think like in terms of the older populations, yes, as you said, Matt, that kind of goes back to where they are getting their news from. But in terms of just the young people, especially, I'm 29, like you said, I'm not just like in high school or fresh out of college, but even I remember just growing up, I remember America back before like everything got so crazy. So I remember going like through Ohio, even when I was back, 12, 13 years old. Yeah, our factories were sort of hollowed out, but there was still something it still felt like America. You know what I mean? And when I go back to Ohio now, I see some of these, and especially near where I grew up outside of Cincinnati, Lockland, Ohio, is this nice little village. They were our main rival in school. And in the past 4 years, they have taken in I think it's somewhere around like 3,000 immigrants from Mauritania. It's some like small Muslim country in Africa. What are these people doing here? So I think especially for 18 to 29-year-olds, it feels like their country is slowly being transformed into something that they did not grow up with, and it's not what they remember. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we could take on these people if my prospects were feeling good. But as homes are increasingly unaffordable, as cars and car insurance and all of these bills are packing up and stacking up, you feel like you kind of got the short end of the stick there for a lot of young people, especially. And I would say as sort of a warning to the conservative side is that you do not want to tell these people, if you want them to stay around, you do not want to tell these people that like they have to settle for less. Okay. This is their country. This is America. It's not for the rest of the world. We're not some global like economic zone. You are American. And Trump spoke uniquely to that. I think Vance does as well. I think that is part of why that they have gained so much support from the youth, is because they treat America like it's an actual nation and not a strip mall like the rest of a lot of our leaders.
I think that's so important that you pointed out, and this is something that I was pointing out on the campaign trail as well, is that Trump said, you actually can have an American dream again. Nobody... It seems so simple, right? Like, this is the thing that we grew up with. Like, this was it was everywhere. It was plastered everywhere. But for some reason, politicians have gone away from that. And Trump said, no, you can do this. This can be something that you can aspire to. Yep. And I think that you see that on the flip side now with all the USAID and all the DOGE stuff that we see. And we're like, wait, we know that we're the richest country in the world. But like, is it okay if we don't give away like every taxpayer dollar to another country?
Well, yeah. You feel like you've been sold out, right? Yeah. Trump just did a press conference where he was revealing some of this. $10 million for circumcisions in Mozambique.
Yes.
Why am I paying taxes for that? Yes. It'd be one thing if I were paying taxes and things were getting better in my community or around the country, if I could see the progress that it was going towards. Right. But everything just seems to be getting worse, and your standard of living seems to be gradually declining. So, like, what is going on?
You see, like, the cleft palate kids in Africa, and you're like, okay, like, I could understand that, but, like, come on. Yeah. Some of these things that they throw out there.
Yeah, it is sort of, I think people are very tired of, and Matt's talked about this, that this is actually the beginning of the 21st century now, of way that, how we can sort of, like, repave this American way of life. But this, like, global project where we're like building up all of these other countries while we neglect our own is done for. And I think a lot of young people are fed up with that and are done with that.
It's interesting. It's basically a return to realism. Yep. It's because people in this age range have to actually still make it in this country. And when people basically acknowledge the American dream is dead, that's sort of what Trump was doing, by the way. He was saying, we're going to bring back the American dream. You've heard of it? You remember that? Like, we're going to do that. They're saying, no, you don't have to live this way. I think that is very much part of him speaking powerfully. But, we should bring up your own talents in speaking to young and old alike. You achieved a remarkable milestone this weekend in that the President of the United States was Napoleon posting.
Yes, he was. Yes. And probably my proudest moment online. It all paid off since I started just as a humble, yes, there it is. Yeah, and I think this also kind of taps into what young men are feeling, especially that we don't want these like old, decrepit politicians. Like Trump is 78 years old, and yet he speaks to the youth better than a lot of these younger politicians do, and especially the older ones. But this is because he taps into a sort of great man of history sort of aspect that you can rescue your country. We don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like serfs in our country. That's not what America was founded for. And if you just take a couple steps back and look at it, you have to say like, okay, America can go this way or they can go that way. And we're not going to do this like same old stupid game that you've been playing. We are taking our country back.
So if you put that up again, let's see this tweet here, because what happened was Trump himself put out the quote, and then he gave really an acknowledgement to you for putting up the quote by retweeting you in this fashion online, and this caused almost an international controversy. Almost every cable show, every podcast was talking about this tweet. So what is your interpretation here? Because you could see some people saying like, well, I don't know, this makes me kind of uncomfortable. What is trying to be said? And of course, as soon as I saw it, I was laughing hysterically because I knew the left was going to go crazy and say that Trump is some kind of dictator and a bunch of other garbage. But speak to what this means.
Yeah, so the quote is, he who saves his country violates no law. And I think one of our congressmen from Texas actually put this really well, that after 4 years of Jacobin terror, do not be expected when Napoleon comes. This is sort of the thing that Tucker was saying when he said, daddy's home, okay? We're not playing this game anymore. So I think what this taps into, I get that some people could say like, yeah, this might feel a little like, I don't know if that's how we want to go with this thing. I was talking to our CEO, Tyler, about this, but real Americans love the Constitution. Okay, we love the Constitution. We love the rule of law. We love order. But when you have so much disorder and chaos in a system, you have to restore order somehow. And that's merely what I was advocating for, was a strong man, a strong executive, and in the light of, some may say, you don't have to go to Napoleon for this. You can go to just American history for this. You can go to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, FDR. You can look for these strong executives that, FDR came out of the Depression. Abraham Lincoln was dealing with the Civil War. You can go to these people who, out of a lot of this chaos and disorder, can bring order to the American system again. And that's merely what I was saying.
That's absolutely true. I want to know what your initial reaction was, because nobody loves Donald Trump more than Logan Hall.
I am his top guy.
If you think you love Donald Trump more, Logan loves him even more. What went through your mind? What did you do? Who did you talk to?
I called every one of my relatives. I texted every one of my best friends. I texted a few of my close work friends. They were all very congratulatory and happy for me, and they said, it probably won't get better than this, so enjoy it. But no, I was very thankful. I know. Especially, this is sort of another thing I was talking about with sort of the right and where they are getting their energy from among this youth. I see there are also a lot of articles that are going around about this now. The Democrats are saying we are getting trounced online. They are destroying us. How do we solve this? And it turns out that the Democrats only had their online audience or energy is completely astroturfed. It doesn't work unless there's trillions of dollars of propaganda propping it up to make people deny reality. But President Trump's team seems that they are very tapped into what's circulating online among the young people, and they're very good at it. So,
all right, Logan, I don't know when your 30th birthday is, but I'm going to throw it out there that tweet should probably be your birthday cake and maybe the entire theme.
that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Logan. Don't go anywhere. We're going to ask you what you think of Elon Musk and what he's going to find at Fort Knox if they do actually audit it. We'll have your answers right after this. Well, DOGE is out there auditing everything, and Elon Musk is posting on X that he wants to go take a look at Fort Knox. He posted this on X, and he said, oh, and it's gone. It's a meme from South Park. So this made me ask you, what do you think that they would find if they actually do go take a look at Fort Knox? Let's start with Matthew Blackburn. He said, the crate from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. MP, I love starting it off with a good movie reference.
Classic movie reference, and one that says a lot about the way government operates. So, yes, we love it. We love it.
They Lie replied, Senator Mike Lee wanted to see it, and they would not let him in. Trump and Elon should show up unannounced with a film crew and a gold expert to test for authenticity and go live in prime time like Geraldo. Trump, you can just see it now. Let's see our beautiful gold. You know that if you could get Donald in there, it would absolutely be must-see TV.
The idea of a live stream like the Geraldo looking into the vault is hilarious to me. I think that's a riot. But it also is notable that in real life, I mean, Senator Mike Lee said, as senator, he asked a few times to go, and they're like, nope, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Ron Paul, anybody? Like, let's just... The list is long. People want to get in there. They haven't seen it in quite some time. That's why it's such a big topic. Johnny Utah is going to round things out. He said, all I know is if you're pushing for this, you better have a plan for if the gold is gone. That would not be an own the other side moment. That would be a complete and total collapse of the system. Johnny, I could not agree with you more on this one.
I mean, Glenn Beck has been asking, about this too, being a gold guy, as he will call himself. And that is a great point. If they go in and the vault is empty, that could cause a lot of repercussions in the markets and otherwise.
And again, on this show, we have documented what Elon and DOGE have done this entire time. And we've been very excited about it. This is the first time where I was like, you know what? Is it a good idea to go in with a live film crew? Because I would think, maybe we peek in there first and make sure that things are okay. Because Peterson, round us out today, because I would hope that we would trust but verify in several different ways.
Yes, an old classic Ronald Reagan quote that my own father used to quote to me about raising his kids, which is trust but verify. In other words, you got to go check. And let me tell you, when I was working years ago on as a consultant, I would look at the flow of money in a lot of the cities in Southern California. And what you began to find right away is the principle is the same as when you're a little kid and you go outside and you start digging up rocks and turning them over. What you realize is if a rock has been there for a long time and it hasn't been moved, you're going to find something underneath it, right? You're going to find bugs or a snake or something underneath that rock. And cities are like this. Government is like this. When you don't verify, when you don't go check, when the rock hasn't been moved, you know before you turn it over what you're going to find. And that is corruption. You just should assume it with 100% certainty. That's the way human life is. The founders understood this. Without sunlight, without the disinfectant, without turning the rock over, you will know what's underneath it 100% of the time. And so when I would see, for instance, when I put this principle in practice, when I would see a city where there's no local media, there's no one paying attention, there's no articles about what's going on, and there's no real transparency, and this has been going on for a while, I don't need to ask why it costs so much to run for city council because I know what's going on when I pick up the rock and look up underneath it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is true of city councils. How much more true is it of the most powerful nation on earth that can't audit itself in any fashion? So I don't think there's any American besides a few dwindling nutty people who is not a fan when they understand what's going on of verifying and not just trusting in these institutions anymore. The time for trust is over. And just normal practice is you have to verify. You have to go in and audit. You have to house clean. You have to go in and see what's going on. Otherwise, the cobwebs grow and worse soon happens. It's a principle of life. And ultimately, no matter what they say about, you're not supposed to do this, or we have these regulations to defend us, or whatever. The principle that Logan Hall actually put up from Napoleon is not about being against the Constitution or the real law, but it's the point that at the end of the day, the whole point of this is to actually save the country. The whole point of this is for the actual good of the country to come about. And that's what the Constitution is for. That's what the laws are supposed to be there for. And ultimately, those laws are executed by human beings who can't just trust, but must verify repeatedly if we're going to have a healthy United States of America.
All right, trust but verify, Ronald Reagan. We can go back to another Ronald Reagan quote, his famous A Time for Choosing speech, when he was going out there and going on about the government agencies. And every now and then, you might want to take a look at the scoreboard and make sure that these government agencies are actually doing what they're saying they're going to do, because this is one of the things that we even said at the top of the show today. $4.7 trillion. They had an optional little line in there that said, hey, by the way, tell us where this is going to go to. It was left blank. They can't account for $4.7 trillion.
And when these kinds of things happen, you have to look at the rotten institution. How do you change that culture? You change the culture because you make clear what the goal is. And this is what Chris Bedford was saying earlier about, we should actually be for America's interests in foreign policy. Sounds obvious, but it's not the case. You have to know what the goal is, and everyone in that entity, in that department, has to know what they're trying to accomplish. In a sports team, if it's a crappy team and the people are kind of just there to make their millions and hang out, and they don't have a strong work ethic, and it's not we are winning championships, right? As soon as you deviate from that for a little bit in the culture, everything else starts to slip away, and that's what's gone on for decades in these agencies. So you have to come in and say, our job is to actually do X. And then you have to, everything else we do is going to revolve around achieving that goal. And you have to have the political will to actually want to achieve it. If you just want, for instance, with athletes, if you just want to make the money and hang out and go to the parties, like eventually you will fail. I mean, there's no talent in the world. You will have to put the work in. You will have to have the right goal. And so it's really simple, right? It's really simple at the end of the day. It's, do you have the political will to actually govern for the sake of what you're supposed to be governing for? And you would never even dream then of having trillions of dollars, right, lost and wandering around. So we need to get back to that, and that needs to be instilled in these teams of people going in to these agencies and reforming them.
Yeah, this is the seismic shift that we can feel right now as a country, that this moment right now that we're in is so different than anything else that we've felt before. And it is the America First movement, and it's all part of the mandate.
Yeah, all of this is coming about because this is what people voted for. People voted for exactly what is happening now. And here's the weird thing. One theory would be, well, Trump is going to the right's pushing too far. I see people saying this. The right is pushing too far, and so therefore they'll lose. They have no concept about how the left won. We're going to push as hard as it takes to finish the job. And guess what? When you do that, you bring more people to your side often. Yeah. And that's what's happening now.
And 45% of people on the left say that they want to move back more towards the center now. So we're winning, America. That's the point. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.